Well, I don't know if I deserve much introduction. It almost sounds like an obituary, and I'm not ready to die. Did grow up on a ranch in western Wyoming, family ranch, that intergenerational transfer was not well handled. We ranched pretty well, I think, back in the day. The intergenerational transfer messed things up quite a little bit, for some of us anyway.
Sir, can you speak up a little bit? That's hard to hear, people cannot hear you.
Okay. They're hard of hearing people on this side of the room too. Anyway, intergenerational transfer kind of messed some things up for us, and as a result of that, I ended up working for others rather than going back to the family ranch. Turned out to be a blessing. I landed where I had opportunities that I would never have had otherwise. I had wonderful coworkers that are smart. We learned from each other. We learned a lot of things. I was able to be exposed to things that if I'd been at home, and I probably would have had to have pled guilty to not going out to events like this near enough and learning things that I should learn. But I've had those opportunities, and I've been able to manage ranches in the state of Washington, on the Mexico border, in the Imperial Valley of California. Grew up tri-state area of Utah, Idaho, Wyoming, where we operated in all three states. Since have managed ranches in eastern Wyoming, in Montana, and several places, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and eventually had responsibility for ranching operations in southern Alberta and in Argentina. And those are wonderful experiences, and I learned a couple of things. One is that principles are eternal. They apply everywhere. They're truth, and they just fit. But practices around those principles have to change to fit the circumstances. Now, that doesn't mean you violate the principles. You don't. If you do, you get in trouble. But to apply the principles, the practices must be different depending on where you are and what your objectives are. So just in a nutshell, that's kind of where I come from and what I've been able to learn. I would say this. I think my college education was a wonderful benefit. My grandfather told me that if I were going to ranch, I'd have to get a lot more education than he did. And he said, you love the animals and you love the grass. I'd worked on some range projects and I'd showed steers and things like that. Enough for him to know that I enjoyed the animals. And that I liked the range because I worked on some range projects, range improvement projects, that I'm not sure were range improvement projects, but at the time we thought they were. And he said, you ought to study business. He said, this is a business. And he went further to say, he said, you know, agriculture is a science, but ranching's a business. And you need to put the two together. And he says, you'll learn animals and you'll learn grass on your own. But he said, you might not learn business on your own, and he was right. You know, I'm glad I was spoon-fed business. I won't say I don't enjoy it, because I do, but I don't enjoy it near as much as I enjoy production. And it's probably the same with most of you. But I could have become very guilty of ignoring business, and probably would have been a failure in what I really wanted to be good at, and that was ranch management. And so, question, can ranching be profitable? And it can be. And I really do believe you have to have a systems approach, and we'll talk about that today as we go along here. You need to create a shared vision. That's what you want to become. And it needs to be led by management, but all team members need to be involved. The team members can be family members, employees, or even people that we sell to and buy from, or our banker, accountant. These people can provide ideas to help us refine our vision, to help make it more forward thinking. And that vision is not cast in concrete. It's up for review periodically. But we ought to have it written down. And then if we decide to modify it a little, when we have updating sessions, we go ahead and update it. but I'm a real believer in written shared vision. And when I say shared, it needs to be shared across your entire team. If you're fighting with each other, you never make the progress as if you all come together and all work toward the same end. Goals, we need financial goals. And these are very important because we can't do anything else if we're not financially viable. We just have to be financially viable or we just can't get much else done. Landscape goals. What do I want my ranch to look like? Do I want 0 trees? Do I want some trees? Do I want a forest? If it's Eastern Red Cedar, I guess you don't want a forest. Anyway, you know, what do we want? And how do we align that with our objectives? And then quality of life. Do we want to be 24/7 with our nose to the grindstone at the ranch? Or do we want to be able to go to the daughter's wedding? Or go watch the kids play a baseball game, or our grandkids? Do we want to be able to take a day at the lake and just have family fun? What does quality of life mean to each of us individually, and how do we build that into our thought landscape, if you will? Then we've got 4 areas to manage, 3 ways to improve profit, and 5 essentials of successful ranch management. These are the 4 areas we've got to manage. Production, and that's the highlight for most of us. And that's what we hear about most of the time, is production. How do we get more production, more production, more production? And that can be intoxicating, and it can also be a terrible mistake. Because you start thinking about production at all costs, and it does cost. And oftentimes it costs more than it's worth. So we've got to be real careful with how do we make sure the production is right for our economic situation. Really important. Economics and finance, can't neglect them, just can't neglect them. We've got to pay attention to them. Marketing, I'm convinced that most of us get pretty good at marketing our main product. Is that steer calves? Is it yearling steers? Yearling heifers? Well, as cow-calf producers especially, our odds and ends, the cull cows, the heifers that we didn't keep as replacements, it's real easy to leave $100 a head on the table, maybe $200, maybe even more. And I didn't believe that until I started watching a few good neighbors that knew how to market far better than I did, and watched what they were doing. And when I started to be a copycat and do some of the things they were doing, it became apparent that I had been leaving dollars on the table just because of, I won't say poor marketing, but neglectful marketing, not thinking of all the possible alternatives. We'll try to help with a few ideas along those lines today. And then people, we must manage people. And I don't mean in a bossmanship sense. I mean more in a leader sense. Good people don't need a boss. Good people need a leader. And then they will boss themselves. So what are we managing? We're really not managing people, we're managing the relationships. And that's what we want to manage. And we have a lot of relationships, not all, including the people that report to us or work with us on the ranch. A lot of those relationships are with people from whom we purchase services, or people to whom we sell our products, or the people that help us. And we need to manage those relationships because they can bring a lot of value. They can bring a lot of ideas. Sometimes it might be as simple as you start talking about something you're trying to do, and they say, well, do you know so-and-so about 30 miles over yonder? Well, no. Well, you ought to go see him because he's doing what you're talking about, and he might be doing it pretty well. And sometimes you go see that person 30 miles away, and lo and behold, he is doing something pretty well that you can learn from and jump forward much more quickly. Okay, 4 things to manage, 3 ways to improve profit. If any of you have been to a ranching for profit school, Stan Parsons put these together years ago. And he borrowed them. He wasn't the originator of them, but he's the one that first brought them to the attention of most American ranchers. That you can increase turnover, to have more to sell, decrease overheads, and that's the low-hanging fruit, by the way, and improve gross margin. Where gross margin is defined this way: it's the total returns to cattle, if we're talking about a cattle enterprise, total returns to cattle minus the direct cost for cattle. The direct cost being mostly feed and vet. Mostly feed and vet. Maybe some marketing costs, maybe some trucking costs, but most of the rest of the costs are overheads. And overheads are either or. You know, either we need it or we don't. But on the direct costs, they vary every time we vary the number of livestock. And then it's our job to say, okay, are we getting the most economic benefit out of those direct inputs? Whole ranch profit. It's whole ranch profit that we strive for, which some people are saying profit per acre. And I like that terminology too. Not profit or even production per cow. Most of the research you read talks about production per cow. If I do this with feed, or do that with something else, I'll get this much more production per cow. And they assume because there's more production, it's going to be more profitable. Terrible assumption. What happens? If, you got more production per cow, you spend a little money and you got more production per cow, well, what if it made the cow bigger and give higher milk? And now you can't run the same number of cows on the same size ranch without buying in feedstuffs. And so you're actually weaning less pounds per acre. And because those pounds are in a bigger package, you sell them for less money. Sometimes we fail to see some of those kinds of relationships. So looking at production per animal can be highly distortive of the true profit and loss picture. So we've got to get to where we can recognize and see those things, see them clearly, and work around them. There's some major determinants of profit here. No place on here do I have individual calf weaning weights. Can't be induced to put them there either. But your enterprise mix and choices of enterprises. Do I run cow-calf? Do I run stocker? And I know there's both in this part of the world. Or do I mix the two? Or do I keep my own calves over to run them as stockers? Which is an option I happen to like, but it doesn't mean it's the best option for your environment. But the enterprise mix is a choice. Do I want to add sheep and goats? You know, there's an old adage out there that says for every cow you can add a ewe and never miss the cow feed. And I think that's true. There's some work being done now that would suggest that it certainly is true. And I'm not sure that you can't add a few goats and increase the cow feed. And if you can do that without having to increase overheads very much, that could be a really good profit generator. Now, if you can find some person in town that wants a little extra spending money and you can get them to take care of a bunch of pasture poultry for you and share the revenue, there might be more revenue still off the same piece of ground. Now, I'm just, throwing out some ideas, and I haven't bought any of them yet. Well, I have. I bought into them, actually. I run some cattle with some people that run goats, and that's a pretty cool deal. Sometimes having the goats be where you want them. How is it Gabe Brown says it? Have a planned grazing system with those goats. We run them wherever they plan to be. And that's kind of the way it is. Okay. But anyway, the enterprise mix and selection is really important to the bottom line. Overheads, and that includes people. We are overheads. People and the equipment and tools they use to do their job, all the way from a pickup truck and a stock trailer, tractor, to just the hand tools and little things that we use. But that's all. Those are all overheads. land and the structures attached to land or under the land, wells, pipelines, water tanks, etc. And stocking rate. Stocking rate is a critical driver of profit. And if used properly can be one of the main drivers of profit. There's two ways to improve stocking rate. One is to reduce the size of the cow and reduce her milking ability, and then you can run more of them. But a far more powerful one is to graze better. And if we learn how to graze better, we can just run significantly more cattle. And nothing else has to change. And I think I've got a slide or two that we can talk about that in more detail. Red feed versus graze feed. Every time that I can substitute a grazed day for a fed day, I've just saved money and probably made money. I look at it this way: anytime I put a machine between the mouth of the cow and her feed source, it's just cost me money. There's no way you can run that tractor for free, or that pickup, or whatever you're using to get that feed put up, stored, and then fed out. It all costs money. Someplace there has to be inefficiency in the chain to get that job all done. Now that doesn't mean some feeding isn't economically viable sometimes, but there's a cost to it, so you've got to make sure it's economically viable and count the whole cost of that feed. Much better off for the cow to feed herself if she can. Calving season. I don't mean to incriminate anybody, but our family indulged in stupidity for far too long. Trying to calve in March in Cokeville, Wyoming, 6,200 feet elevation. My birthday's the 3rd of April. More than half of my birthdays were white birthdays. You know, I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, I'm dreaming of a white birthday. I wasn't dreaming of a white birthday, I was dreaming of a green birthday. And it was just too often. It was the snow that had come last November or December and was still there. By the end of April, we were going to be cleared up, but we weren't. And we were trying to calve in March. Now that had happened, that transition had happened before I was old enough to have any input into it. But I just wonder how much more hay we had to feed because of calving in March than if we'd been calving in April, maybe mid-April, rather than in March. And, you know, so that's the way we do it. That's the way smart people do, isn't it? So I proceeded on when I went to manage other places. Wouldn't do it ever again. Couldn't pay me enough to do it. Well, maybe you could pay me enough, but it'd be a lot. You probably couldn't pay me enough, even if you wanted to. I would accept enough, but it'd have to be an awful lot. Okay, realized herd fertility, and this is huge. And I wish we had EPDs that would tell us more about this. And they're striving to do a little better, you know. Heifer pregnancy kind of shoots in that direction. Stayability kind of shoots in that direction. But neither one of them really get there. They can be a little helpful, and I wouldn't ignore those EPDs if they're available. But if we could get calving interval between first and second calf, and let's say true calving interval, so when the cows start to calve as 2-year-olds, we put bulls with them immediately. And then we know the true calving interval between first and second calf. I happen to think that's a fairly highly heritable interval. And I think it's highly predictive of lifetime fertility. We don't have those kind of EPDs, but why do I want realized herd fertility? Again, it's a matter of turnover. If they're pregnant, and if they raise a calf and give me something to sell, well, that's the reason for the word realized. Can't just be a conception. It has to be a live birth, has to be a live calf at weaning time, and has to go on to be sold either as a calf, a yearling, a bred cow, or a cull cow. I want to clip a coupon out of every conception that occurs. You know, ideally it'd be 100% all the way, right? 100% of them get pregnant, 100% of them would have a calf, live calf born, 100% of them weaning calf. Well, we know that's not going to happen. We don't live in a perfect world, but the closer to that we can come, the better. And boy, it drives profitability in a big way. I just ran some economic analysis on this, comparing an 85% pregnancy rate with a 95% pregnancy rate. And the difference per cow was over $100 in a herd. Just the time of calving and those pregnancy rates and how much you have to turn the herd and what it costs to do that. Okay, wise input use for optimum production. And that's just, if you're going to spend $1, try to get 2 back. Heard a guy one time, stalker operator in Mississippi, Gordon Hazard. Some of you probably heard of Gordon, but a bright guy. He said, you know, people call me cheap. I said, I'm not cheap. I'll admit to being tight, but I won't admit to being cheap. He says, because I'll spend, if I can spend $1 and get 5 back, I'm anxious to spend that $1. He said, the problem with most cowmen I know is it seems like they're happy to get 50 cents back for every $1 they spend. And, you know, we got to be cautious because sometimes we are. People will tell us we spend $1 here and we're going to get this much more weaning weight. And we just kind of cross that out, okay, so we spend $1. Maybe that much weaning weight only turns 75 cents. Another thing your feed salesman will do for you is he'll say you're going to get this much more weaning weight out of this implant or out of this feed additive or whatever. You're going to get this much more weaning weight, and then what does he put? What price does he put against it? What's the market price, right? Well, what happens as weights go up? Prices come down. So the value of additional gain, when the price might be almost as high as $2, the value of additional gain only hovers around $1. They don't put the value of gain, they put the market price. So don't let that one run away with you either. Got to be real careful with that. Wise input use. I like to project that I'm going to get at least double my money back. I'm going to spend $1, I want 2 back. You might ask why. The reason is because we're not very good estimators. We deal with biology, which is not near as predictable as chemistry, not near as predictable as a laboratory. We're dealing with biology, and then it's buffeted by climate, and so things can change. So our ability to estimate and predict is not near as good as we would like, and so what if I mispredict? That's why I'd like to be able to think I can get at least $2 back. And then, the next thing that can happen, what if the price of that input goes up? Far more than the price of the product, value of the product. So the price goes up, and now is my herd sort of addicted to that input? If I pull it away from them, is production going to crash? And I think those kind of things can happen too, so we've got to be real careful with that. And then marketing, we talked about that just a little already. So that tells me if I do these things, reduce overheads, market well, and improve 3 key ratios, that I'm going to kind of be on the way toward profitability. Reduce overheads, that's the thing. Market well, improve 3 key ratios: acres per cow, cows per man, and fed feed versus graze feed. Those are profit drivers, huge profit drivers. Okay, 5 essentials. I've talked about these for years. We could spend till 5 or 6 o'clock this afternoon, but I won't. So I'm going to have to go across them pretty quickly. And if you want to stop me and ask some questions, don't hesitate to raise your hand and let's discuss a little bit. But your approach must be both integrative and holistic. By integrative, I'm talking about putting bits and pieces of information together. You can't be a holistic thinker unless you know some bits and pieces. And you have to have some knowledge. You have to have some ideas. And those have to be built on truth to the extent that they can be. Truth and observation, and then you can have these bits and pieces of information, and then holistically you link those together. And when you make a holistic decision or a systems-based decision, you should account for all the positives and negatives that would result from a potential change in your management or a potential change in inputs. And that's what we strive to do. So this holistic approach or systems approach I don't care which of those you call it. Some people will argue for differences in those terms, but there isn't much. It's enabled by integration. Without integration, it won't happen. Okay, some examples. Cow size and growth rate and milking ability. If they're gonna get bigger, well, take it this way. We want more weaning weight. We can get more weaning weight. It's hard to get weaning weight without milk or cow size going up. I won't say it's not possible, but it's very, very difficult. And the animal, the genetic correlations are not in your favor there. So you get bigger cows, they eat more, you gotta run less of them. When I was in my 70s, I worked in the AI business. And boy, I was big on weaning weight. I was trying to sell weaning weight. You know, I heard it said over and over again, we sell them by the pound. Well, yes, we do sell them by the pound. How many pounds have we got to sell? Well, bring the calf, we thought we had more pounds to sell, but that wasn't always true, we learned. Just because the calf is bigger doesn't mean we have enough of them to be able to sell more pounds. Okay, milking ability, we can say the same thing. You know that after you reach what a calf needs, well, even before that, but the calf does need a certain amount of milk to function well, to develop an immune system, to become healthy and ready to grow, and deal with the complexities and difficulties of Mother Nature. But after that, the conversion of grass to pounds of milk to pounds of calf is a horrible conversion. And yet we push more and more milk. Horrible conversion. And yeah, we need enough milk to get calves started in life, but in my mind, the sooner they can begin to drink a little water when mama does, eat a little grass when mama does, and start slowly to make that transition from a wholly dependent calf that functions much like a monogastric animal to a good, fully functional ruminant, I think the better off we are. Okay, heterosis. Oh, I love heterosis. When I was a graduate student, had a major professor that was, this is in ag economics, and he was very interested in crossbreeding. He'd seen results from Fort Robinson, Nebraska, and those results, and some of those cattle were moved to the Meat Animal Research Center when it opened. So this happened in the late 50s and 60s. This research was done just crossbreeding Hereford, Angus, and Shorthorn. So they made all possible crosses of the three breeds to get F1s. When they got the first F1 calves, they found that through added survivability of the calves, because they were healthier, they survived at a little higher rate, and a little additional growth, that on a per cow basis, they were getting 8% more pounds of calf. Well, then they took all those F1s and mated them to the third breed, and they found out the whole thing was additive. Then, between added fertility in the cow, a little more milk in the cow, the added growth rate of the calf, and put that whole thing together, they were now getting another 13%, or 21 total percentage points different than comparing back to the straight bred cows. Now you gotta understand, when they started this, they cut those populations all in half. Half of each population, Hereford, Angus, and Shorthorn, was still mated to be straight bred. So they could weigh those calves and compare them with the F1 calves, and then compare them with the three breed crosses and the number of cows. And they could, so these things were calculated very accurately. Well, I saw that information, I started getting excited about it. And I sat in on an animal breeding class, and that got me more excited still, and I'd sit down and I'd draw out crossbreeding programs that I was going to use the day that I became a ranch manager. Well, lo and behold, it wasn't too many years later, and I did become a ranch manager. Here's what I learned. A lot easier to draw those things on paper than it was to put them on the ground. And then, it wasn't too many years later, and I started learning about grazing management, and now there are a lot of paddocks per herd. Some of you probably heard about that idea. A lot of paddocks per herd, so I can do the things I want with time control in my grazing. Well, I certainly didn't want to multiply that by 3 or 4 breeds that I happen to be using. And so it was a wonderful relief to me when the Lead Animal Research Center started looking at composites and found that yes, I couldn't maintain maximum heterosis, but I could maintain a pretty good level of heterosis and treat all the cows as if they were straight bred. Do inter-sea matings of composite animals. And that was cool. And I've done that ever since. Mated composites and loved composites. And I restructure them now and again. I use some purebred input to restructure those composites periodically. And that's not major restructuring, it's just minor restructuring. But, okay, heterosis. What am I saying here? I overlooked a whole lot of things, but as I got systems thinking put to work, how do I manage grazing management? How do I manage cattle? What's the difference between maximum heterosis and optimum heterosis, and how much less can I take in heterosis to get much more in many other areas? So that's the kind of thing we're talking about when we talk about systems thinking. Calving season, I already mentioned my growing up experience. You know, my brother calves in May, doesn't use the calving barns. He doesn't have to have all that equipment. Matter of fact, there's cows on the range, it says calf. You know, it's really nice when the cows calve and people don't. They're the ones that are supposed to be doing the calving, not the people. And it saves all kinds of labor and misery and everything else. Plus feed. You know, the day a cow calves, her nutrient requirement nearly doubles. If you're calving in the wintertime, you got to throw a lot more at her. If you wait till she can feed herself, yeah, that increase still occurs, but she takes care of it. She and Mother Nature. The wormers and insecticides. And this is just examples of systems thinking. I'm going to have two groups of you here. We've never heard of wormers. We're back in the 30s. No insecticides. And all of a sudden we start getting these flies, and then we hear about fecal egg counts and find out that our cows are wormy. And so you guys over here, you all buy in. You start worming your cows. Treating for flies, all the internal and external parasites. You guys over here say, nah, you're kind of hard-headed. I think the old way works good enough. We're not going to do that. Well, if you have had fecal egg counts at a fairly high level and quite a lot of fly problem and that sort of thing, I'm going to guess that you guys over here, boy, you're smart. You know, you got a nice boost in performance this year and next year and so on. I'd like to know what had happened if that went on for 10 years, what the difference would be at the end of 10 years. And I don't claim to know the answer to that. I have an opinion, which I might share or might not. But I do know some things that would go on. For you guys, your cows don't have any genetic reason to develop any resistance to any of those parasites. So the ones that would have been culled by Mother Nature because they just didn't perform in the presence of the parasites because they were less, or they were more tolerant of them. You know, they just didn't have any reason to develop a resistance. But over here, these cattle have to keep developing some resistance, and the ones that don't have it get culled. They don't get pregnant or whatever, they don't perform quite as well, and they get culled. Now the other thing that's happening over here, while these animals are getting culled, not only are these animals not developing any resistance to the parasites, but the parasites are developing resistance to the parasiticides. We know that happens, right? How many of you tried the fly tags for a series of years and know what happened? Okay? So we do that, and then we start this race between the chemical companies and the parasites. What's going to happen faster? Are we going to get a new chemical faster? Or are the parasites going to develop resistance faster? Hey, I don't know the answer to these kind of questions, okay? But I've got some ideas around it, but I don't know the answers with any kind of completeness. Also, I can tell you this. Parasiticides might be damaging things that are important to soil health. It would be wonderful, wouldn't it, if they just killed the target organism, but they don't? And I know a good entomologist that says that for every insect that we label as a pest, there are 1,700 that are either beneficial or benign. And we can't just kill the one we want to kill. And we might not even know that it has some benefit someplace out there in the environment. So there's just so many things that we don't know all the answers to. But that's what systems thinking, that's where our minds have to start to work. So I think that I use that mainly because I'm not telling you to use parasiticides or not. They're still in my arsenal. I use them sparingly, but they're still there. And but what I am suggesting that it's a wonderful way to start getting systems thinking into our minds. There's all these things going on simultaneously, and how do we keep track of them? Well, we don't perfectly, but the more of the stuff that goes on that we can be aware of, the better. Okay, production systems and marketing. It's just a wonderful exercise in systems thinking. If we want to change our marketing, we might have to change our production system. If we change our production system, we will definitely have to change our marketing system. So those things, and so we synchronize all that and even more. And the major determinants of profit, okay, those are all interconnected. They tie together. We need to see those ties as we become a systems thinker. So for profitable decision making, let's become systems thinkers. Just, that's what we need to do. It's not just one thing, one decision that has one outcome. Every decision has multiple outcomes. Mr. Aldepode, there we go, something like that. The guy who the Stewardship Awards was named after.
Aldo Leopold.
Aldo Leopold, thank you. There we go. I was putting the two names together and not getting either one of them right. He very eloquently has a statement, and I can't say it quite right, but he said if we could attach a string to one part of the world and pull on it, the whole world would move. And that's the way it is in agriculture and biology. If we change one thing with the way we manage our livestock and our land, everything is going to react. Everything's going to have a change. Everything that we get our animals to do on the soil surface has a reaction beneath the soil surface that is either positive or negative. Never just neutral, positive or negative. How many of us even think of that? I didn't for years and years and years. Even after I started learning about good range management, I had a vague idea that we're doing something with the soil because I was aware of water cycle and maybe more infiltration. But I didn't realize, even start to realize, how much effect that what the animal was doing at the surface was having beneath the surface of the soil. And that could be either positive or negative. We know so much more now than we knew 20 years ago that it's almost crazy. Okay, I want to strive for continuous improvement of the key resources, land, livestock, and people. These are assets which if poorly managed can depreciate, if well managed they can all appreciate. And we don't own the people, but we can increase their value, and it's win-win, better for them, better for us. Land, livestock, and people, I'd like to have them all improving as much of the time as possible. For improvement of the land, I like adaptive time-controlled grazing. I think it's a powerful, wonderful tool. Principles. Cattle at about 6,200 feet elevation. This is just off into Utah, off the southwest corner of Wyoming. Utah has two northeast corners. This happens to be the west northeast corner. And a year plus since the last graze. If I can find the pointer here. There we go. See on that side hill there, the sagebrush, the grass is still green. This is in June. You give that till mid-July, the end of July. If the cattle have never come there, that would all be yellow and brown. Now this year it's green. The riparian area here in the foreground, I could fence that. Not a very big area, so I won't. And I could probably get by with grazing it twice in a year. And most of those grasses are going to need a full year to recover. And why do I want a year plus? Because I don't want to graze them the same time next year that I grazed them this year. Because if I want good depth of rooting, I want that plant to have its time to really do its thing next year, where this year it would have been grazed at kind of a critical time for those plants. But I want my cows someplace grazing. This year it was their turn to be on this piece of ground. Might also notice, what's that cow right there eating? A thistle plant. And they'll learn to eat a lot of things. Okay, same ranch, 5 miles apart. 28 to 45 days since the last graze, and I can get away with it using the very same grazing principles. Anybody want to guess why?
Grass has allowed the rest to recover.
Well, that's part of the reason, but why? There you go. Irrigation. Yeah. Well, I might get to the one I want yet. There. Right along there, there's a canal. And you can see kind of,
Yeah.
and it goes up and out and around and comes back over here, and so that part's irrigated from down in here. Water flowing that way. Those cattle move and the water comes right behind them. The sun's going to shine in that part of the world every day in the summer. And so it's going to keep growing. And so it has plenty of recovery. And so I can go back and graze it again. I might get 3 grazes in the summer out of that. And then those are stocker cattle, and they don't picky about it because those are native meadows. They're not planted meadows. They're native meadows. And they'll leave a lot of the coarser grasses, and they make pretty good winter cow feed. So back in the winter, with the cows and graze the stuff that the stockers didn't like. Okay, short graze periods, followed by lengthy recovery periods. Short and long are relative, depending on where you are, the circumstances, the grass growth, the grass growth rate, and the class of cattle, what you're wanting to get done. That's why we call it adaptive. But you have to adapt it, taking into account the principles that we're managing around. Adaptive grazing will improve the land, the soil, and I'm convinced that it will. You'll get greater stocking rates, but improve the carrying capacity first. Make sure you have the carrying capacity before you add the cattle. Carrying capacity is the supply, stocking rate is the demand. And I've seen people sometimes add cattle a little too quickly, and then they're running out of feed. Thank you. Running out of feed, and when they run out of feed, then they decide, okay, I gotta move the cattle a little quicker. If you have to move ahead of plan very many times, you know that you're beginning to overgraze. You all, or you, maybe not yet, but the next time around you will be overgrazing. And that's one of the things I love about good adaptive grazing is that you have early warning signals. If you're having to move faster than you planned, you know you're getting into trouble. And you can start to destock. We all hate to destock, but I can tell you this, the quicker you start to destock, the less you have to destock. And so, do it now, don't wait. Southeast Montana. This guy is an incredible story. He met Alan Savory many years ago. Didn't meet him, listened to him get talk. Went home and started doing some things. He said, you know, I might have made a little progress, but he said, I didn't understand near all I heard. And he said, I don't know how much progress I made. And then he heard of a grazing school that was going to take place on the Buffalo Ranch, and he decided to go there. And went to this grazing school and came home. He started stepping it up a little, as he calls it, and do quite a little better. And periodically, he'd have this guy that taught the grazing school come back and work as a consultant with him a little bit. And well, when he started, he was stocking about a cow per 30 acres, and he said, and I was pretty fully stocked. When I first met him, he was a cow per 16 acres, and the cows were a little bigger, so he had doubled. I got talking to him, and I said, if you were to buy a ranch just like this one, I said, I know that's impossible, but let's assume you could buy a ranch just like this one when you're starting again, what would you do differently? He said, oh, I'd ratchet the grazing up a whole lot faster. And I said, well, why? And he said, well, look at it this way. He said, I have spent over the last 25 years, he said, and I kept pretty good record, so I know pretty accurately what I spent. I said, I spent about $50 an acre in fence, and stock water development. And he said, you multiply that number by the number of acres I have, and that seems like a lot of money. He said, but look at it this way. I just bought another ranch for $50 an acre. And I don't have to pay property tax on this one. And he said, and I didn't have to add a pickup, I didn't have to add a saddle horse, I didn't have to add a tractor, I didn't have to add manpower, except on days we work the cattle. He says there's 4 or 5 days a year when we ship, we pregnancy check, we brand, etc. And he said we have to either get more neighbor help or more day labor, or have to stay longer ourselves. But 4 or 5 times a year, we have to add help. He said, think of that. Every overhead on a per cow basis was just cut in half. Think of the economic power of that. I mean, that is huge. And overheads are the low-hanging fruit. They're one of the things that get in the way of profitability. So this is a pretty cool place. He still has cheatgrass. He says, problem I've got with cheatgrass, he says, I'm afraid it's going to all disappear. And he says, it's pretty good early spring feed. I don't know that it'll all disappear, but as you know, people tell you if you got cheatgrass, that's what you got. It's like in the fescue belt in Missouri. Fescue's what you got, that's what you've got. But I know people with fescue that got a lot of things in the fescue, and I know a lot of people with cheatgrass that got a lot of things in the cheatgrass, and the cheatgrass is disappearing. So good grazing management seems to have a wonderful effect, and it seems to encourage diversity. Oh, this is a place in Missouri, maybe the best grazer I know. But he took over the little farm there. He took about 5 or 6 acres per cow. He's now at 1.9. I visited with him again last week. Every time I go, I learn something. But this is cool. He's got South Pole cattle, and they are nice. His pregnancy rates are fantastic. Can you believe this? I mean, this guy is stupid enough to try to calve in May in Missouri. Do you know when that has him breeding? His preg rates are all in the 90s, all of them. And well into the 90s. And those cattle, hot days, I've been by there in hot days. He's got a few black cows. They're off standing in the pond or huddled up in the shade. The red cows, they're all out in the pasture grazing. This happens to be April. Not a leaf on the trees yet. And those cows are standing in brisket deep grass. They are a little shorter than some cattle, but they're not that short. And I drove around the neighborhood there, and I didn't see any grass anyplace except at his place, hard about 4 inches. And I'll bet you anything, the neighbors drive by and they say, I'll bet you that guy spends an awful lot of money on fertilizer to get grass down. And he doesn't spend any money on fertilizer. The fertilizer he gets is what comes out of the back end of those cows. You know, and what they trample and put on the soil surface. The power of this grazing, if we do it right, is incredible. This guy, he's south of Fescue Belt. So what was their habit? Their habit was to till in the fall, plant ryegrass and fertilize the ryegrass to have winter beef. He got tired of that, and he started no-till drilling, cool season grasses, lagoons, and forbs into tall standing warm season grasses as they start to go dormant. He says he starts to plant and he just keeps on grazing in the stockpile of warm season grass. He hopes by the time that they're done, what he's reseeded first, no-till drilled in first, that'll be coming on. And usually it is, but some years he has to feed hay for a little bit of gap time in there, between the time he runs out of the stockpile of warm season grasses and the time his cool season annual grasses are coming on. And this is April, and that's all cool season stuff. Warm seasons haven't begun to start yet. But that's pretty good cow feed, is it not? He says it costs him now about 1/3 to buy the seed and run the no-till drill. That includes the ownership cost and the operating cost. buy the seed, run the no-till drill, costs about a third of what he used to spend for seeding, tilling, fertilizing, and supplemental feed that he used to have to buy that now this provides. So, pretty nice change, and the cows are doing almost all of the harvesting. You'd almost make your own salad out of that, couldn't you? What he calls cool season grasses, or what a lot of us would call grains. It could be oats, it could be rye, triticale, that kind of stuff. And then some clovers of various kinds that do well that far south. But really, really interesting deal. Some of you may have heard of this guy, Emery Birdwell and Deborah Clark. But they run stocker cattle, and he buys between, depending on the year, between 4,000 and 6,000 a year. He runs them in a single bunch. And he'll move them up to 6 times a day. Now, he's not fencing behind them, he's just moving the front fence and allocating them fresh feed that often. But the transformation that's taking place on the ranch, and for you stocker operators, he says, yeah, I'd give up a little gain per head. But he said, my gain per acre has changed from in the 40s to in the low 100s, 102 pounds. And he says, it's really gain per acre that I sell. So it's incredibly powerful. Okay, continuous improvement of livestock. Remember, we're trying to improve the key resources, land, livestock, and people. And that begins with cow selected for this. Gave this talk, not this talk, talks somewhat similar in Georgia, and they said, we don't have this in Georgia. And I said, I want this to represent the toughest few months of the year for your cattle. Pick what's the worst time of the year for your cattle? 2 months, 3 months? And then you select the cattle that fit that environment. Select the cattle that you think will work there. And then you cut the resources, you ask your cattle to fit that environment. Most of you have to cut the tail off that dog a piece at a time. You can't do it all at once because you'll have to cull too many cows. Because most of our cows are sissies. They're not ready to deal with any kind of environmental stress or difficulty. But then after you reduce the input and then you cull this list, open and dries, wild, ones that require individual attention, poor calf, raised poor calves, and ugly, and that's your definition, but be careful, don't call too many of them ugly. You gotta like her, don't you, if she'll breed in the first cycle every year. Okay, then select the right bull. Be careful. Most of us have our bull selection undoing what our cow culling was trying to do. I hope you all heard that. Most of us let our bull selection undo what our cow culling was trying to do. And that's to get cattle to fit our environment and our management, what we're trying to accomplish. Moderate, people ask me what moderate means. And I said, well, if your definition of moderate is 1,600 pound cow, you better go for small. But you know, it's amazing. Everybody tells me they got moderate sized cows, all the way from 1,600 to 900. And I don't know what moderate is, but it's the one that fits your environment well. With minimal supplementation, we'll get pregnant year after year. And then let her be whatever size she wants, as long as she'll do that. As long as she'll do that. Press on growth rate, but press on it slow. Because if you press on it hard, it's going to outrun you. And pretty soon you've got infertility. I give quite a few talks, and I'm often confronted with people that say, tell me how to get my cows pregnant. We used to have pregnancy rates in the 90s all the time. Now we struggle to keep them in the 80s. And when I visit with them a while, I find too big, too much milk, not enough heterosis, those kind of things. And they're coming back to haunt them because the cattle aren't fitting the environment. And they're not willing to buy a lot of feed to compensate for the things they used to not have to do, but now would have to do to keep them pregnant at a good rate. So, these are the cows that are the good ones. You want bulls whose dams and whose sisters and whose daughters can do the things we've listed here. How many of you get to read articles in the popular press that tell you how to take care of a bull through the winter so that the bull can get cows pregnant next summer? Does that ever bother any of you a little bit? The bull never has to lactate, never has to gestate. Why does he need any special care to get cows pregnant next summer? He's got the easiest life of any critter I've got. I managed ranches in the Sandhills, Nebraska for nearly 20 years. And our bulls were the last thing we thought about. We would put them in a bull pasture, large number of bulls, and we would feed them a little protein supplement to help them digest that grass. But they were the last thing we fed hay to. Lowest on the priority list, what gets fed hay? If the snow gets to a certain point, it gets difficult to work through, our coming 2-year-olds, we're going to get the first hay feeding. Probably the weaned heifer calves are next, and then the cows. Well, we had some grandma cows next, and then the cows. And finally the bulls. Last thing we'd feed hay to. If they couldn't pass a BSE tough, they didn't pass. But most of them did, because they'd been selected under that regime for a long, long time. And so they had those kind of capabilities. Anyway, if you've got to pamper the bull, you want their daughters as your replacement. Okay, continuous improvement of people, and we won't take much time to talk about this, but it begins with the manager's, understanding the manager's job, which is to create an environment in which people want to excel, and then provide the tools, training, and freedom to do it. This is a very important role when you have to create that environment, and I don't have time to talk about how you go about doing that. But just give people something to be excited about, something they're willing to work for, and can have fun at, and can enjoy the end result, and know that they were a participant in that end result. Okay, I can't empower anybody, but I can, as a manager, but I can encourage, I can facilitate, and I can reward. And I should do those things if I can. But empowerment belongs to the individual. For any of us to become empowered, we have to do it. Hopefully we work around people that encourage it, facilitate it, and reward it. And so that's part of that environment we're talking about. Managers must be teachers. I don't know how many of you have this experience, but I contend, and I've heard other people say this, matter of fact, I borrowed this saying, when the learner is ready, the teacher will appear. And that's happened in my lifetime over and over again. And I think any of you that have tried to be fairly progressive and tried to be lifelong learners, you could probably say the same thing. People seem to show up just about on time. Probably wouldn't have been ready to listen to them before, but now we are, and here they come. Maybe people were there saying it all the time, we just weren't paying attention, but all of a sudden, the light comes on. Leadership is best gauged, hard to define, but best gauged by the voluntary response of those being led. If it's not voluntary, it's not leadership. Maybe pushership, maybe coercion, but not leadership. Okay? Then good managers have to, and I probably need to expand this statement a little bit, need to acquire and use good planning and decision-making tools. We don't have time to go into all the mechanics of that today, but that's an important part of being a profitable business. And gosh, our laptop computers have made that so much easier. I mean, you can put more on that little thing than you used to put in 5 rooms. And in one big room of a computer. But we need to use those tools. Good financial records, good production records. We don't have time to talk much about it. Let me just say about the production records. I don't need very many records. I don't need any individual calf weights, not one. Now, as a seed stock breeder, yes, I do. But not as a commercial breeder. People say, well, don't you need a scale to at least weigh the calves? So you know which the 4 calves are? No, I can see the 4 calves. And I'll make an eyeball cut and I'll be fairly accurate. And then do I sell the calves? Yes. What about mama? Yeah, I sell them too. So the day we wean, I sort off those poor calves. Next morning, I dump them back in with the cows, and then I ride off the pairs, and the cow and the calf are both going to get sold. And that cleans up a lot of problems. I think every budget should start with an annual stock flow. I don't know how many of you have seen that form before, but it just tracks inventories, and you can project from now till the time you're going to do your budget. You know, you project from here to year end. That's when I'm going to do my budget. But I can project year end, and then I can start the next year with that inventory, and it gives me all the numbers that I have, all the cattle I have to budget for, and what class they are. So if I feed a yearling and a 2-year-old, the cows are different from each other, I can put that into my budget. Actually, I linked that spreadsheet that's huge, and I interlinked all the various budgets that I work with on that. But that starts, and I can project my revenues, my sales from it. I believe in grazing planning, and I believe in using the charts. Now, they've got these computerized now. If you're a novice at grazing, my suggestion would be that you chart it with the paper in front of you for the first few years. I think that somehow that gets to your head better than when you put it on the computer. You have to work through that, pencil and paper, have the last 2 or 3 years charts in front of you when you're doing the current one, and after a while you will get so you can do it on the computer with good facility. But I really believe in doing them in front of you. Most places I go, they need a drought plan and a heavy snow plan. You guys need a drought plan. You need a fire plan, maybe more important than a heavy snow plan. You guys might talk about heavy snow, but I'm not sure you know what that means. You can get it for a day or 2 or 3, but it usually doesn't last very long. And, but you know, you do have to have contingency plans. What if I can't graze? What if the feed isn't here? What do I do? Destocking plan for drought, highly important. Or know where you can take the cattle. You just can't stay here. And feeding through a drought usually doesn't work very well. Now, if you're not yet sure it's a drought, maybe feeding for a little while works. But remember, the quicker you start to destock, the less you have to. Okay, then we must wage war on cost. We've talked about overheads. Overheads are either or. Either I need it or I don't. Most of us have a lot of stuff we don't need. A coworker of mine actually came to me as a student intern out of the University of Wyoming quite a number of years ago, and the guy was absolutely brilliant, and you could tell that right away. I got him hired into our company, and he worked with me for 5 or 6 years. The guy has an ability to put money on the bottom line. It was just uncanny. But he left our company and he went to work for somebody else managing a ranch at Saratoga, Wyoming, which is about 7,200 feet. Cold, and he was gonna quit feeding cows every day of the winter and could reduce that significantly. And anyway, he changed it from a pretty big loser to a pretty big profit maker in about 3 years' time. And I said, "How did you do that?" He looked at me and he grinned, and he says, "You know how I did it." And I said, "Overheads?" He said, "Sure, that's the low-hanging fruit." And he said, "I was kind of lucky, though." He said, "I started cutting these overheads," and he said, "Some of the guys on our crew just thought I was nuts, and they left." And he said, "You know, the lucky part about that was the right ones left." He said the ones that could kind of see what we were trying to accomplish, they stuck around and said, we'll stick with this. We think this maybe makes some sense. And then, you know, then he started fine-tuning more after that, and then he started working on the gross margin side of things. How do we get a greater return, and how do we cut the cost of feed and vet and that sort of thing. And so he went on, and it continues to become a little more profitable all the time. But if I want to get to efficient, I want to match cow size and calving season to the available resources, and it's going to affect that list on the right-hand side there. You get the cow size and the calving season right, and you're going to change carrying capacities. Fed feed versus grazed feed will move in the direction of grazed feed. Overheads will reduce. Grazing management is facilitated, and maybe that's a two-way relationship. Grazing management will facilitate cow size and calving season. Labor and facilities, herd fertility. That's a composite of systems thinking kind of things that will all go to work in your favor. Change the calving season to be more closely in sync with nature, and I think that varies a little from place to place, and I'm not sure exactly what in sync with nature is, but it's not February, it's not March. Okay, increased grazing days and reduced feeding days. Minimal development of replacement heifers. We've always talked, you know, we gotta have them 65% of expected mature cow body weight to get good conception rates. Well, if mama's always been pampered, and these heifers have always been pampered, and their sires have been pampered, that's probably true. Or if we're trying to breed for February calving, that's probably true. But if you want them to calve, can I say, a reasonable time of the year, it's not true. They can get pregnant in good numbers at 55% of body weight, sometimes as low as 50% of expected mature cow body weight. And Rick Funston, at the University of Nebraska, Andy Roberts at Miles City, Montana, they're